Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
After my divorce last year, I needed to find a place that would accept my German Shepherd mix. Anyone whose apartment hunted with a large dog knows it's basically impossible. Most places have weight limits or breed restrictions, and the few that don't charge ridiculous pet deposits. I was getting desperate when I found this small studio apartment in an older building. The landlord was surprisingly cool about my dog, and when I saw the layout, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. My entire apartment sits directly above the downstairs unit's garage. No shared walls with bedrooms, no neighbors below to complain about my dog's claws on the hardwood or his occasional zoomies. I figured I'd found the perfect setup for both of us. My downstairs neighbor turned out to be the most inconsiderate person I've ever encountered. At first I thought maybe he just didn't realize how thin the floors were. Winter came early that first year, and every morning at 6:30 sharp, he'd fire up his truck in the garage directly below my bedroom. Well, here's the thing. He wouldn't just start it and leave. He'd let it warm up for 30 to 40 minutes, while blasting his radio so loud that my dishes would rattle in the cabinets. I went down to talk to him the first time it happened. I knocked on his door and told him that I was his upstairs neighbor and asked if he could turn down the radio when warming up his truck in the mornings. I told him the sound really carried up through the floor. He just said that's how he does things and he needs to warm up the engine properly. When I asked if he could at least keep the music down since it was pretty early and the sound travels, he said he'd see what he could do. Spoiler alert, he didn't do anything. If anything, it got worse. Not only did he keep the radio cranked, but he started leaving his garage door wide open all day long. During winter, this meant all the cold air would just pour into the building's lower level, making it impossible for my tiny space heater to keep up. My heating bills were insane. I tried talking to him again. I told him that the open garage door was making it really hard to heat my apartment and asked if he could close it after he left. He told me he liked the fresh air and it was his garage. When I said I understood but it was affecting my unit too since the building's heating system wasn't designed for this, he just shrugged and said it wasn't his problem. Summer rolled around and somehow he made it worse. Same deal with leaving the garage door open, but now instead of freezing, I was roasting. My little window unit couldn't compete with all the hot air flowing up from below. I was running it constantly and my electric bill was through the roof. But the thing that really pushed me over the edge was the garbage situation. Instead of putting his trash outside his own door like literally everyone else in the building, he decided it was easier to haul it upstairs and dump it in front of my door. His reasoning? He stored his garbage cans in the garage, so it made more sense to leave the bags by my door until pickup day. The first time I found garbage bags blocking my entrance, I thought maybe it was a mistake, but it kept happening. Every week, sometimes twice a week, I come home to find his trash piled up so high I could barely get my door open. I tried reasoning with him again. I told him he couldn't keep leaving his garbage in front of my door because it was blocking my entrance. He asked where else he was supposed to put it, since his cans were in his garage. I suggested outside his own door like everyone else does, but he said that wasn't convenient for him. When I pointed out that it wasn't convenient for me either when I couldn't get into my own apartment, he just told me to move it if it bothered me. That's when I knew this guy was completely hopeless. I went to building management next. The property manager seemed sympathetic and said she'd have a word with him. A week later, nothing had changed. I went back to her office. She told me she had spoken with him about the garbage and garage door issue. When I said nothing had changed and I still couldn't get into my apartment half the time, she said these neighbor disputes could be tricky and asked if I'd tried talking to him directly. I told her I had multiple times and he didn't care. She promised to send him a written notice about the building rules. That notice must have been written in invisible ink because absolutely nothing changed. If anything, he seemed to get more creative with his inconsiderate behavior. He started having friends over who would park in front of the building's entrance, blocking the mailboxes. His music got louder. The garbage situation got worse. This past weekend was my absolute breaking point. He threw a party on Saturday night, which was fine. I'm not anti-fun. But when I came home Sunday morning after staying at my sister's place, I couldn't even see my door. There were 6 overflowing trash bags piled up, filled with beer cans, bottles, food containers, and general party debris. The smell was awful, and I literally had to climb over the pile to get my key in the lock. I stood there looking at this mountain of garbage and something just snapped. I tried being reasonable. I tried going through proper channels. I tried every polite approach I could think of. Time for a different strategy. I gathered up every single bag and carried them downstairs. Then I stacked them neatly in front of his garage door, not blocking it completely but positioned so that when he opened the door, they'd tip over and spill everywhere. I figured he'd see them, realize what happened, and maybe finally get the message. Monday morning came and I heard his usual truck warming routine start up, but this time something was different. I heard the garage door opener, then immediately heard him swearing loudly. Apparently he hadn't noticed the bags and just backed straight out. The bags split open and garbage exploded everywhere. Beer cans rolled under cars, food containers splattered across the parking lot, and bottles scattered in every direction. From my window, I watched him stand there in his driveway, hands on his hips, looking at the disaster he'd created. For the next 30 minutes, I got the most satisfying show of my life. He had to chase down every single can, pick up every piece of trash, and rebag everything. Cars were honking at him because he was blocking the driveway. Other neighbors came out to see what all the commotion was about. He looked absolutely miserable. When he was done cleaning up, he carried all the bags to the actual dumpster behind the building instead of bringing them back upstairs to my door. It's been a week now and I haven't found a single bag of his garbage by my door. The garage door is still open all day, and he still blasts his music during truck warm-up time, but at least I can actually get into my apartment now. Started as a general warehouse worker right after high school, moving boxes and organizing inventory. I needed the job to help support my younger sister while our mom worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. About 6 months into the job, I noticed how much time we wasted waiting for the one certified forklift operator to move heavy pallets around. Sometimes we'd stand around for 20 minutes just waiting for him to finish his smoke break. I figured if I got my forklift certification, I could help speed things up and maybe catch management's attention for a promotion down the line. So I saved up the money for the certification course, took it on my own time over a weekend, and passed with flying colors. The supervisor was impressed that I took the initiative and started letting me use the forklift whenever needed. It made my job easier and kept the workflow moving smoothly. Fast forward to now, and we're seriously short-staffed. 2 guys quit last month without giving notice, and corporate hasn't approved hiring replacements yet. Everyone's been pulling extra weight, and I've been spending a lot more time on the forklift moving pallets that would normally take 3 guys to handle manually. That's when this one coworker started giving me grief about it. This guy had been there about a year longer than me but always found ways to avoid the heavy lifting. While the rest of us were breaking our backs moving inventory, he'd mysteriously disappear to the bathroom or suddenly remember he needed to organize something in the far corner of the warehouse. The trouble started on a particularly busy Monday morning. We had 3 trucks to unload and several large orders to prep for shipping. I was on the forklift moving a pallet of automotive parts when he approached me and complained that I'd been using the forklift all morning. He said some of us wanted a turn on it. I asked him if he knew how to operate it. He brushed off my question and said it couldn't be that hard since you'd just drive it around and pick stuff up. I almost laughed at that. Clearly, he had no idea about the safety protocols, weight limits, or proper handling procedures. But I kept my mouth shut and continued working. Throughout the week, his complaints got louder and more frequent. He started making comments in front of other workers about how I was hogging the forklift and not giving anyone else a chance to use it. The irony wasn't lost on me since he'd never shown any interest in doing the heavy work before. Things came to a head on Friday when he walked into the supervisor's office. I could hear him through the thin walls, going on about how I was gatekeeping the forklift and not being a team player. 20 minutes later, the supervisor called me in and told me that while he appreciated my work ethic, maybe I should let others handle the forklift duties sometimes. He said I didn't need to do everything around here. I pointed out that I was the only one with certification besides the main operator, and he'd been out sick this week. The supervisor brushed off my concern and said he was sure the others could figure it out. He told me to just step back and let them take some responsibility. The supervisor had that look that said the decision was made, probably just to avoid dealing with more complaints. I agreed to let others use it if that's what he wanted. I walked back to the warehouse floor where my complaining coworker was waiting with a smug grin on his face. He asked if he was getting his turn now, and I told him it was all his. I parked the forklift in its designated spot, logged off the computer system, and placed the keys in the lockbox like we were supposed to do at the end of each shift. Then I grabbed a hand truck and went back to moving boxes the old-fashioned way. He strutted over to the forklift like he'd just won the lottery. I watched from across the warehouse when he fumbled with the lockbox, clearly expecting it to be unlocked. When he realized he needed to get the keys from the supervisor, he looked annoyed but still confident. A few minutes later, he was back with the keys and climbing into the driver's seat. That's when I saw him struggling with the startup procedure. Our forklifts require you to log into the safety system with your certification credentials before they'll even turn on. He called out to me from across the warehouse asking how to get the thing started. I explained that he needed to log in with his forklift certification number. The color drained from his face. He asked what certification number I was talking about. I told him about the forklift operator certification that you need to legally operate industrial equipment. That's when it hit him. He'd never actually gotten certified. He just assumed that since he'd been complaining loudly enough, someone would look the other way and let him drive it anyway. But our warehouse takes safety seriously, especially after a guy at another location got seriously injured last year. The insurance company made it clear that only certified operators could touch the equipment. I watched him panic for a moment before his entitled attitude kicked back in. He decided he'd just figure it out while he went along. He managed to bypass the login system somehow and got the forklift running. What happened next was like watching a slow-motion disaster. He drove straight toward a pallet of industrial cleaning supplies, clearly not understanding how the lifting mechanism worked. Instead of properly positioning the forks and raising them slowly, he just drove forward and tried to lift at the same time. The pallet tipped and suddenly, there were bottles of industrial cleaner crashing to the floor, some of them breaking open and creating a chemical spill. The noise was incredible, and the smell hit us immediately. I could hear him panicking and repeating that this wasn't supposed to happen. The supervisor came running out of his office, took one look at the mess, and immediately started making phone calls. First to management, then to our safety officer, and finally to OSHA because anytime there's a chemical spill involving industrial cleaning products, it has to be reported. Within an hour, we had safety inspectors on site documenting everything. They interviewed witnesses, reviewed our safety logs, and discovered that an uncertified operator had been using equipment he wasn't qualified to handle. The fallout was swift. My co-worker got suspended pending a full investigation. The warehouse had to be partially shut down for cleanup, costing the company thousands in lost productivity. And because he'd bypassed the safety login system, there were additional violations to deal with. The supervisor pulled me aside the next morning looking embarrassed. He apologized and said he should have asked about certifications before telling me to step back. I told him not to worry about it and that I understood he was trying to keep everyone happy. He explained that until we could get more people certified and trained properly, I was the only one authorized to operate the forklift. He asked if that was okay with me. I told him I could handle it. When I walked back to the forklift, I passed by his empty workstation. His suspension had turned into termination after the investigation revealed he'd also lied on his initial job application about having warehouse experience. I fired up the forklift, logged in with my certification credentials, and got back to work. The warehouse was quieter without his constant complaining, and productivity actually improved, with one less person finding excuses to avoid real work. My wife and I have been renting this little house for 3 years now. We're both teachers at the local elementary school, and the rent was affordable on our combined salaries. The house isn't much to look at, but it's home. Our landlord has always been a piece of work. He's one of those guys who thinks owning property makes him some kind of king. He'd show up unannounced, let himself in with his key, and act like we were squatters in his palace. We put up with it because finding another place in our budget was nearly impossible. Things got worse 6 months ago when he decided he wanted to sell the house. He started pressuring us to move out even though our lease had 8 months left. He'd call at all hours, bang on our door, and leave threatening notes. We knew our rights, though. We'd done our research and knew he couldn't just kick us out. The breaking point came last Tuesday. My wife was at school, and I was homesick with the flu. I was lying on the couch when I heard his truck pull up. He started pounding on the door like the police were after him. I asked him what he wanted and told him I was sick. He demanded that I open the door right away because we needed to talk. I dragged myself to the door and opened it. He pushed past me into our living room like he owned the place, which technically he did, but you know what I mean. He told me that my wife and I needed to be out by Friday because he was selling the place to a developer. I reminded him that we'd been through this before and that our lease ran until May. I explained that he couldn't just kick us out like that. He said he'd show me what he could do and claimed that he was the owner, not me. I tried to explain that rental law doesn't work that way and that he needed to give us proper notice and follow the legal process. His face turned red. He started yelling about how we were freeloaders and how he was tired of dealing with us. I told him he needed to leave and that we'd discuss this through our lawyers if necessary. That's when he went to his truck and came back with a rifle. He told me I thought I was so smart with my lawyer talk and ordered me to get out of his house right then, or he'd make me get out. This maniac was pointing a gun at me in my own home. My hands were shaking and I felt like I might throw up from fear and the flu. I shouted at him to put that thing away and told him he couldn't threaten me with a weapon. He said he could do whatever he wanted on his property and told me to start packing my stuff or he'd drag me out himself. I was terrified but tried to stay calm. I told him I needed to call my wife to let her know what was happening. He said I had 10 minutes to start packing or he'd start shooting up our belongings. I called my wife first and my grandfather. Grandpa is 82 but still sharp as a tack. He's a Vietnam veteran who taught me how to hunt when I was a kid. More importantly, he has a concealed carry permit and isn't afraid to use it when family is threatened. Grandpa told me he'd be right there and said I should keep the landlord talking and not do anything stupid. My wife was already on her way home from school. I went back to the living room where our landlord was still waving that rifle around like some kind of cowboy. I suggested that we calm down and talk about this reasonably. He said the time for talking was over and that I should have listened when he was being nice about it. I asked him if he called harassing us for months being nice. He said we people didn't understand respect and that maybe this would teach us. I heard Grandpa's car pull up. The landlord heard it too and got even more agitated. He went to the window to look out. He asked who that was and reminded me that he'd told me not to call anyone. I explained that it was my grandfather who was just checking on me because I was sick. Grandpa walked up to the front door, which was still open. He took one look at the situation and his expression went stone cold. This was the same man who survived 3 tours in Vietnam and raised 5 kids on his own when Grandma died. Grandpa told the landlord that he needed to put that weapon down right away. The landlord said this was none of his business and that it was between him and his tenant. Grandpa replied that when someone points a gun at his grandson, it becomes his business. The landlord turned the rifle toward Grandpa, which was the biggest mistake of his life. Grandpa had his concealed carry weapon out faster than I could blink. One shot to the leg, and our landlord was on the ground screaming. Grandpa said he should have listened when he asked nicely. The police and ambulance arrived within minutes. My wife had called them on her way home. The landlord was conscious but couldn't feel his legs. The paramedics said the bullet had done some serious damage. The police took statements from all of us. The landlord tried to claim he was just defending his property, but 3 witnesses and a rifle pointed at unarmed people told a different story. They arrested him at the hospital. This wasn't his first time threatening tenants. 2 other families have filed complaints against him in the past year. The prosecutor was very interested in our case. He ended up pleading guilty to aggravated assault and illegal eviction practices. The judge sentenced him to 2 years in prison and ordered him to pay us damages for emotional distress and violation of our tenant rights. The bullet had damaged his spine, so he'll be in a wheelchair for the foreseeable future. We got to stay in the house until our lease expired. His wife had to sell it to pay for his legal fees and medical bills. The new owners offered us a lease renewal at the same rate. Grandpa became something of a local legend. The story spread around town pretty quickly, and now other landlords think twice before trying to intimidate their tenants. The local tenant rights organization even asked him to speak at their monthly meeting. Our former landlord has to use a wheelchair-accessible van now. My partner and I have been married for 6 years now, and we have a pretty good routine with our 4-year-old son. We're not super strict parents, but we do have rules that work for our family. No screen time except for our weekly movie night, regular bedtimes, and basic respect for our home. My partner's sister has always been what I'd call a free-range parent, basically letting her 3-year-old daughter do whatever keeps the peace for the day. A few months ago, my sister-in-law needed to bring her daughter to our state for an autism assessment. The specialists here are apparently much better than what's available where they live. When my partner told me they'd asked to stay with us for nearly a week, I immediately suggested we help them pay for a hotel instead. I know that sounds harsh, but I had a feeling about how this would go. My partner said she was family and we had 5 bedrooms, so it was just a few days. I pointed out that I knew how different our parenting styles were, and maybe it would be better for everyone if they had their own space. He called me ridiculous and said they needed our help, so I agreed to let them stay. I figured maybe I was being too judgmental, and it could be a good learning experience for our son to see that different families have different rules. The first day started rough. My sister-in-law's daughter had her tablet glued to her face from the moment she walked in, volume cranked up to maximum. Our son immediately noticed and came over asking if he could watch too. I reminded him that wasn't our tablet and he knew our rules about screen time. My sister-in-law explained that her daughter needed it because it was the only thing that kept her calm in new places. I tried to be understanding. New environments are hard for kids, especially one who might be on the autism spectrum. But when dinner time came, the tablet came to the table too. She told us her daughter wouldn't eat without it. The volume was so loud we could barely have a conversation. Our son kept staring, clearly confused about why the rules were different for his cousin. When I gently suggested maybe we could lower the volume a bit, the little girl started screaming like someone was murdering her. My sister-in-law just shrugged and said this was what happened when you tried to change anything, so it was easier to just let her have it, how she wanted it. Day 2 was worse. The screaming started at 6 a.m. and continued throughout the day. Not just regular kid tantrums, but full-blown meltdowns that lasted hours. The tablet was blasting cartoons from morning until night. Our son couldn't concentrate on anything and kept asking why his cousin got to break all our rules and why he couldn't have a tablet. I kept explaining that everyone's family was different, but our rules were still our rules. By the 3rd night, none of us had slept properly. The noise carried through our entire house, despite us putting them in the bedroom furthest from ours. My son ended up sleeping in our bed because he couldn't handle the constant noise. My partner suggested maybe we should get some earplugs or something. I told him this wasn't sustainable, and I had to work from home the next day, but couldn't even think straight. But the real problem was when my sister-in-law started disappearing. The first time, she announced she was going for a quick walk to clear her head and would be back in like 20 minutes, asking if her daughter would be fine with us. 3 hours later, she strolled back in like nothing happened. Her daughter had been screaming for the last hour asking where her mom was, and we had no way to contact her because she'd left her phone behind. When I asked where she'd been and said we were worried something happened, she casually mentioned she'd run into an old friend and they grabbed coffee and time just got away from her. This became a daily pattern. She'd announce a quick walk and vanish for hours, leaving us to deal with her increasingly distressed daughter. Meanwhile, I was buying special snacks and frozen foods we never normally keep just so the kid would eat something. I was driving them to appointments, trying to work around the constant chaos, and basically providing free childcare services while she disappeared to who knows where. The breaking point came on day 4 when I had an important work call scheduled. I'd set up in my home office, closed the door, and put up a sign asking for quiet time. 10 minutes into my call with a potential client, the screaming started again. But this time, it was right outside my office door. I could hear my sister-in-law on the phone in the living room, completely ignoring her daughter's meltdown happening 2 feet from my office. The tablet was blasting at full volume, the kid was throwing toys at my door, and I had to mute my call and apologize to my client. When I came out after ending the call early, I found my sister-in-law still chatting away on her phone while her daughter had dumped an entire box of crackers on our carpet and was stomping on them. I asked what was going on, and she said her daughter was just having a moment and would calm down. When I mentioned I was on an important work call and had put up a sign asking for quiet, she apologized and said she didn't see it, then added that I knew how kids were. That evening, after her daughter finally passed out from exhaustion, around 10 p.m., my partner and I headed out. He acknowledged it had been hard but said she was struggling and parenting a special needs kid was exhausting. I told him I had nothing but empathy for that, but I didn't sign up to be free childcare while she disappeared for hours. We were already hosting them, driving them around, buying special food, and I couldn't even work from my own home. He said I was being too harsh and that family helps family. I responded that family also respects boundaries, and if they needed to come back for another assessment, we either pay for a hotel or set very clear rules about what we can and can't do. Well, guess what? 2 weeks ago, my sister-in-law called asking to stay with us again for another round of appointments. This time I didn't hesitate. I told her I was sorry but that wouldn't work for us this time. She asked what I meant since they'd stayed there before. I explained that last time was really difficult for our family and we'd be happy to help find a hotel or maybe contribute to the cost. But hosting wasn't something we could do again. The explosion was immediate and spectacular. She said she couldn't believe how selfish I was being and asked if I had any idea how hard this was for her. She said she was trying to get her daughter the help she needed, and I was worried about a little noise. I said it wasn't just noise, but a week of chaos that affected our entire family. She shot back that her daughter had special needs, and I should be more understanding. I acknowledged that, which was why we were offering to help with hotel costs, but we couldn't host again. Then she really let me have it, saying I thought I was so perfect with my little rules and routines while some people had real problems to deal with. She reminded me I was supposed to be family. My partner tried to jump in, suggesting maybe we could try again with some ground rules, but I said no, the answer was no. My partner was furious with me afterward, saying I was being unsupportive and unkind. But here's the thing, we did everything we could the first time. We opened our home, spent our money, provided free childcare, and lost sleep for a week, all while trying to maintain some stability for our own child. 2 days after I said no, my sister-in-law called back with a completely different tone. She told me she'd found a really nice hotel with a pool that takes insurance assistance and the appointments were going to be covered too, so they were all set. Turns out she'd never even looked into other options before assuming we'd just handle everything for her. She'd been so used to other people solving her problems that she hadn't bothered to explore what resources were actually available to her. My partner still thinks I was too harsh, but our son has been sleeping through the night again. I can work from home without interruption, and our house feels peaceful. Back in 1985, I was working as a technical support specialist for a mid-sized company that manufactured industrial equipment. We made these complex machines that ran entire factory production lines, and they all connected through an internal computer network. It was cutting-edge stuff for the time, and I was one of the few people who understood how to troubleshoot the system when things went wrong. The company had just finished a major overhaul of their equipment interface. Everything looked different, worked differently, and had new features that nobody really understood yet. The problem was that all our documentation still described the old system. When customers called with problems, I was basically flying blind, trying to figure out solutions on the spot. My manager pulled me aside one morning and explained the situation. He told me they needed someone to learn the new system inside and out, and since I was good with the technical side and seemed to pick things up quickly, He wanted to know if I'd be willing to take it on. I asked him about the documentation problem, since I couldn't learn from manuals that described a completely different system. He explained that was actually part of what he was asking. They needed someone to rewrite the entire technical manual from scratch. It was a big job, but it would really help the company. I agreed, partly because I was curious about the new system and partly because rewriting technical documentation seemed like a good way to advance my career. What I didn't know was that I was about to discover one of the most ridiculous corporate policies I'd ever encountered. When I dove into learning the system and writing the new manual, I started reading through all the old documentation to see what might still be relevant. Most of it was outdated, but buried in the back of one thick binder, I found this weird appendix that made no sense at all. It was titled TP Protocol Technical Specifications and claimed to describe the networking protocol that our machines use to communicate with each other. The more I read, the more confused I became. It talked about how this protocol worked on a 2-layer or 3-layer network, with each layer called apply. It described how all messages were the same size and that the end of each message was marked by something called a perf. There was even a section about troubleshooting a problem where a cancelled character could cause the system to pause, which the document referred to sitting on the can. I read through several pages of this technical gibberish before it finally hit me. TP protocol, 2-ply or 3-ply, performance sitting on the can. This wasn't describing our computer network at all. Someone had written an elaborate joke document describing toilet paper like it were a networking protocol. I was still laughing when I brought it to my co-worker who had been with the company longer than me. I asked him if he had seen this appendix in the old manual, explaining that someone had written a fake technical specification about toilet paper. He casually mentioned that he had written it himself. When I asked him why, he explained that about 2 years ago, the company had instituted a new policy where any document that a customer might potentially see, even the most technical engineering specifications, had to be reviewed and approved by the marketing department before it could be included in official documentation. I said that seemed excessive and asked what marketing people could possibly know about technical specifications. He agreed completely, saying that was exactly his point. He told me he thought the policy was ridiculous, so he decided to test it by writing that entire appendix and submitting it for approval. He expected someone in marketing to catch on and reject it. When I asked what happened, he said they approved it with no changes, not a single edit, not one question about what any of it meant. The toilet paper joke had been sitting in our official customer documentation for 2 years. The marketing department had rubber-stamped pages of toilet paper jokes without reading a single word. When I finished writing my updated version of the manual, I decided to leave the TP protocol appendix right where it was. After all, it had already been officially approved by marketing. I submitted my completed manual to my manager, who looked it over and seemed pleased with the work. He told me it looked great and that he was going to forward it to marketing for final approval before they started printing copies. A few days later, I got called into a meeting with my manager and Karen, who was the head of the marketing department. She had printed out my entire manual and was holding it like it contained state secrets. Karen started the meeting by saying she had serious problems with the documentation. When my manager asked what kind of problems, she explained that there were sections that were completely inappropriate and unprofessional. She specifically mentioned the TP protocol appendix, calling it nothing but juvenile toilet humor disguised technical writing. I tried to keep a straight face while telling her that section was already in the previous version of the manual and had been approved by her department 2 years ago. She said that was impossible, claiming her department would never approve something like that. She was getting red in the face, clearly embarrassed that her department had been caught in such an obvious oversight. She declared the content completely unacceptable and said she didn't care what happened in the past. The inappropriate content needed to be removed immediately. My manager pointed out that if her department had already approved it once and it had been in customer documentation for 2 years without any complaints, maybe they should just leave it alone. Karen absolutely refused, ordering us to remove the section entirely. I told her I understood her concern but said I was curious about something. I asked how her department could have approved such obviously inappropriate content in the first place, and whether they actually read the documents they were approving. The question hung in the air like a bad smell. Karen went from red to purple. She demanded to know how I dared question her department's processes, insisting they had procedures in place to ensure quality control. I said I was sure they did, but found it interesting that those procedures had failed so completely that pages of toilet paper jokes made it into official customer documentation without anyone noticing. My manager was clearly trying not to laugh. Karen realized she was trapped. She couldn't admit that her department didn't actually read the documents they were supposed to review, but she also couldn't explain how such obvious nonsense had been approved. Karen declared the conversation over and ordered me to remove that section from the manual. She warned me never to include inappropriate content in company documentation again, then stormed out of the room clutching her copy of the manual. After she left, my manager turned to me with a grin and agreed that we should probably remove that appendix from the new version. I said absolutely, then asked what was going to happen to marketing's approval process. He suggested that Karen would probably be personally reviewing every technical document that crossed her desk from now on. A few weeks later, I heard Karen had implemented a new policy requiring all marketing department staff to actually read and understand every document they approved, rather than just checking for spelling errors and company logo placement. Apparently, she had been quite embarrassed when word of the TP protocol incident spread around the company. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.